So, can a woman be a prime minister? Absolutely yes. There is nowhere in our constitution that says a woman cannot be a prime minister. It only says that the prime minister needs to have the majority support of the Dewan Rakyat. As you can see from even the past few weeks, you have our few political leaders jostling for support from multiple political parties. So why haven't we seen a women prime minister? I think that comes down to the issue of political culture. The political culture in Malaysia that we have currently does not favor women. And what I mean by that is that we are not living in a culture where women are often seen as leaders naturally, right? Of course, we talk about mothers and wives, but when we talk about looking at women empowerment or women in leadership roles outside the home, I think it's still something that's very alien to a lot of people. And you can see this by the lack of representation in both Dewan Rakyat and the Dewan Negara. And when women speak up in parliament, oftentimes it's always about issues that affect women. And while that's not a bad thing, why do we only invite women to talk about women, right? That's one question that we don't ask enough. For example, if you're organizing a forum about the economy, forum about human rights, how many women come to our mind immediately when we think about inviting or engaging industry leaders and industry players? So I think that's the core issue that's also prevalent in political parties. Because of Malaysian style of coalition politics, leadership positions are mostly seen as rewards and also stepping stones, right? So it's not really seen as, okay, how do we groom more diverse political leaders, right? So when we talk about political parties, you have Sayap Wanita, you have Sayap Belia, and I think the argument for minority representation is slightly similar when it comes to women and youth. So let's push apart political parties, right? If women want to be politicians, why don't they just be politicians? Why don't they just run? Did you know that to run as an MP, you actually need 10,000 ringgit as a deposit, and to run as an Ahli Dewan Undangan Negeri or ADUN, you need minimum 5,000 ringgit. And if you don't get enough votes in the elections, you actually lose your deposit. So how many women or how many youth are able to cough up that amount of money easily if you don't have support? And that's why political parties are so important, because they fund elections, they fund your campaigns, and they put up the money for you. So how many political parties, when it comes to deciding, okay, dah nak election, siapa akan run for election? Do they consciously think about, how many women are we putting forward? How many young people are we putting forward? I think that's the question that political parties don't ask themselves, and it's a culture that we need to change. The closest we have is Deputy Prime Minister, YB Dr. Wan Azizah. Interestingly now, she actually has the most MPs when Pakatan came into power. However, because of coalition politics, because of agreements, Tun Dr. Mahathir became Prime Minister instead. Whether this was a right or wrong decision is a different conversation, but it shows how far women still need to go in terms of making sure that their merit is recognized, their achievements is recognized, and that they are not sidelined when it comes to discussion of leadership. There are countries macam, I think, Norway, Scandinavian countries, where not just they have women prime ministers, like for instance Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. Scandinavian countries also have women political leaders leading the scene there. When you look at Malaysia's population information, 50% of our population and voters are women. Before we even think about, like, let's say women prime ministers, do we even have 50% of women in Dewan Rakyat? Do we even have 50% of women in our state governments? So some people have talked about, should we have women only seats or women only political parties? I disagree with this, because I don't think enforcing institutional quotas like that makes sense. And finally, right, when women speak up, when women voice up, when we lend our voices to decision-making processes like policy making, passing laws, even to the very ground level of discussing about budgets and issues, we add representation, we add diverse voices, and we add important input that some parties may not necessarily pay attention to or have taken into account before. And that is why representation is important. However, representation for the sake of representation is not good enough. You need to also build up a culture where the ideas of having a diverse representative parliament is a normal situation.